Councilman Lavelle, if you would like to call to order.
Yes, so thank you all. I'd like to call the third meeting of the Greater Hill District Neighborhood Reinvestment Fund Advisory Board to order. As already mentioned, this meeting is being recorded. Please mute yourself. If you're not speaking, please use your raise your hand function and myself or Ms. Malines will call on you. As already mentioned, we also ask that you turn on your cameras for technical reasons. It's for us to be able to take accurate minutes and be reflective of who is saying what. Also need to note, if you have not returned your conflict of interest form at this time, you are not permitted to participate in any discussions, motions, or votes today. Per the guidelines, each member of the advisory board shall, at the beginning of his or her term, execute an acknowledgement of the reinvestment fund's policy regarding the conflicts of interest in the form attached to the guidelines as Exhibit B. And the Greater Hill District Neighborhood Reinvestment Fund guidelines can only be amended by action of the URA board. The guidelines that are currently written and approved by the URA board are the result of years of negotiations and concessions amongst community stakeholders. The relevant guideline language is on the slide. And I would just please remind all to please turn in your conflict of interest forms. With that, can we move into roll call? Julie, will you please call the roll?
Jen, can you go to the next slide for me, please? Is the representative of Member Organization District 6 on the call?
Here.
Is the representative of the Hill CDC on the call?
Here.
Is the representative of the Hill District Federal Credit Union on the call?
Here.
Is the representative of the Hill District Consensus Group on the call?
Here.
Is the representative of the Wesley Center AME Zion Church on the call? No groups. Is the representative of Shenley Heights Community Development Program on the call?
Present.
Is the representative of the Historic Hill Institute on the call?
Here.
Is the representative of the Office of the State Representative Jake Wheatley on the call? Is the representative of the Office of the County Executive Fitzgerald on the call?
Here.
Is the representative of the Office of the Mayor on the call? Is the representative of the Pittsburgh Public School District on the call? Is the representative of the Allegheny Council, County Council on the call?
Yes.
And is there anyone else on this call who has who I did not call? Anyone else on this call who has not been able to represent themselves? So anyone else on the call who has not been called? Marie, could you tell us who you are, please?
Marie Kelly from Calvary Baptist Church, pastor Calvary Baptist Church, President Hill GHDNRF Ministry, Hill District Ministry Alliance.
Thank you for identifying yourself, Pastor.
Yes, dear.
This is not an open meeting. This is a board meeting.
Okay.
And so we have heard from HDMA and regarding their wish to participate. And
Okay.
the board will certainly take that under advisement and
right.
have discussion on it. But at this time, we would ask that you please exit.
I sure will. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Roll call is complete. Hand it back over to the co-chairs.
And we have a quorum.
Thank you. With a quorum, we can begin moving forward. Just a quick note about Robert's Rules of Orders. As noted in the very first meeting, we were attempting to not be hard and fast with using Robert's Rules, but at the same time, in order to have clarity, especially around motions and votes, at times is going to be very necessary. And so you were emailed a one-page summary of Robert Rules of Orders yesterday, and we would just like to draw your attention to the handling motions section. So our motions are clearly recorded for transparency. Hannah, can you please give us a quick overview?
Yes, thank you, Councilman. So on the screen, you will be able to see, we have a quick refresher, mostly around motions practice. So once an item is brought to the attention of the board, we ask that a motion is raised. The chair will ask for a motion, and then we ask that the board members state their name and say, I, Hannah Swanbeck, move that and make your motion. The chair will then ask for a second, and then we ask for the same procedure. If you disagree with the content of a motion, we would then ask, when the chair asks for a second, we would ask that you say, no, I, Hannah Swanbeck, move to amend this motion by, and state your amendment. Then we would call for a second motion to that revised amendment. And if it passes, then we would move into discussion. So the order would go motions practice, discussion, and then call for a vote. Each member will have the opportunity to vote in the affirmative, negative, or you may abstain. And just a reminder to please disclose any conflicts that you have to the board as you learn them. Thank you. And Marimba, I believe the next slide is yours.
So everyone, we wanted to also make sure that we're recognizing that there is what we call a gradient of agreement here to offer some additional vocabulary. We want everyone to have an opportunity to provide input when possible. However, we do need to, as you know, get through a lot of business. We have a lot to achieve in a short period of time. So we have shared with you and we'll share with you via email this gradient of agreements, which really gives us some shared vocabulary around where people are. So one, I wholeheartedly endorse. Two, agreement with a minor point of contention. In other words, not perfect, but it's good enough. Three, supportive with reservations. I can live with it. Number four, I abstain. The issue does not affect me. Number five, more discussion is needed. I don't understand the issues well enough yet. Number six, don't like, but will support. It's not great, but I do not want to hold up the group. Number seven, serious disagreement. I am not on board with this. Don't count on me. And eight, is I block this proposal, right? And so obviously we are using Robert's rules, but we should, from time to time, just understand and appreciate that there are going to be levels of agreement, and we do want to operate in a form that really respects and honors the sense of community that we are always striving to build in the Hill District. So we can use this as a secondary document to communicate and clarify our feelings and our positions, but we will continue to use Robert's rules as the primary tool to govern meetings. Thank you. If you have not received this already in your inbox, you will.
Thank you very much, Marimba. I believe next on our agenda is the approval of minutes. But before we approve the minutes, I would just like to inform everyone that because these meetings are now being recorded and actually posted on the URA's website, URA staff will no longer be taking detailed minutes of our meetings. The recordings will actually serve as the minutes of the meetings of this advisory board, and URA staff will compile and share brief summaries and the link of the recording from each meeting. With that being said, I believe the revised minutes from the very first meeting, which occurred on October 12th, were distributed to you by email on December 14th. The minutes from the second meeting on November 23rd were distributed to you by email on December 14th. Are there any further corrections to the revised minutes of the first meeting of this board?
Julie, this is Dr. Ellis. Did you receive my email with my corrections?
We did. We actually did not send out the updated October minutes because we sort of wanted a little more guidance from the co-chairs about the best way to address some of the issues that were raised. We do have a draft with your edits or your corrections added, Dr. Ellis.
Thank you.
Barbara, you have your hand raised?
Yes, I didn't receive any updated minutes, so I have no idea what you're talking about. I believe I just heard Julia say that they weren't sent out. So I believe that that should be tabled because I don't have them to review. And I certainly haven't seen Dr. Ellis's comments either. So I don't see how we can proceed with either the 17th of October or the 23rd of November minutes. Because they haven't been reviewed. And I would also like to make a motion that these communications have to be given to board members at least 72 hours ahead of time for consideration. You know, I can understand circumstances that may not allow that, but it's difficult to get some things done when you don't have the document. And, you know, even this presentation, it hasn't been distributed to the board members. I think that that would help with the proceedings to have the things in advance. Thank you.
Thank you, and I apologize if I misspoke. Myself and Marimba had met with the URA regarding the minutes, and so I was of the assumption they had gone out, so I apologize if I misspoke. I'm willing to certainly table the approval of the minutes until our next board meeting so that everyone can have appropriate time to review them. And I'm also willing to begin working better to ensure you also have the presentation of what we're going to be going through prior to the actual meeting. Hannah, did you want to address anything?
Yes, thank you, Councilman. The reason that the minutes were not able to be sent out in advance of this meeting is because we did not receive all of the written corrections until yesterday. So we didn't receive them even with 24 hours advance notice, so we were not able to implement. We did send out the November meeting minutes, but again, those were sent out late as well. So we apologize. And I do agree with the board that I think tabling both would be in the best interest of transparency.
But to lift up what Hannah is saying, I do think it's important just to note that that the team members who are staffing this effort will need the feedback soon enough to incorporate it to get it back out to the board. So we want to just recognize that that time is needed. So when you get the minutes, please send them back to them within 48 to 72 hours if you have comments, revisions, or edits or suggestions so that they have sufficient time to get them out to the entire board. Thank you. Councilman.
Thank you. With that, I believe we can move into old business. As was discussed at our last meeting, the next Greater Hill District Neighborhood Reinvestment Fund Advisory Board meeting will be held the week of January 3rd, 2021, with a target date and time of Thursday, January 6th at 2 p.m. The URA is closed on Monday, January 3rd. Do we have a motion to direct the URA staff to try to schedule the next meeting of this board for the week of January 3rd? Is there someone willing to provide a motion to instruct the URA staff to schedule our next meeting?
So moved.
And that's Richard Witherspoon for the record. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a question.
Discussion? Was that Arby?
Yes. What I'm trying to understand is, I think that week I've got like 4 meetings already scheduled so far. So the meeting, not during the day and in the evening, early evening, that would help.
Okay, duly noted. Is there any other discussion from members of the board?
I would, I prefer the daytime. It just works well. Evenings are a little tougher.
Okay. I believe most of this was, and I apologize, I did miss much of the last month's meeting, but I believe most of this was covered then. With that being said, I see no further discussion, and it was properly motioned in second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Are there
Opposed?
any? One opposed? Are there any abstentions? The motion is approved. That moves us on to new business and discussing funding priorities, which I know was a major topic at the last meeting. As discussed at the last meeting, the next steps for this committee is to begin to work through our priorities, our timeline, and our application. We are going to focus on defining our priorities at this meeting. Here were some of the proposed questions for discussion. What are the outcomes, metrics that we are looking for? What's the selection criteria we are using? If a grant is awarded, it is upfront grant or is it reimbursement? And is there a cap on how much money an individual or organization can request? And we can certainly add other questions that you all may have, but these were the ones that I understood where it came out of the last meeting of priority. So what I would like to do, if the co-chair is okay, if we could just go one by one and begin answering these questions. And this is open to the board. What are the outcomes and metrics that we are looking for as it relates to considering our funding? You certainly don't all have to go at once. Arby?
We have to take into consideration the immature status of our neighborhood and the census tract data and the recent developments in the census tract 305 and 506. So I think that we should be prioritizing how we are going to increase the residency so that they can support the business development that we want. I am curious as to how we expect Black business to survive without foot traffic and Black residents. A couple things that I've looked at and researched indicates that we don't have a mature community and that our velocity of money is essentially zero. So how do we have to somehow take into consideration the September 2018, I believe it was, gender equity report, excuse me, and how that applies to the Hill in terms of our women and children who were very prominently mentioned in that. So economic development is necessary, but I'm trying to understand how our current community would support business when we basically don't have it. We have a velocity of money of zero.
I don't know how to raise the hand, but as far as outcomes and metrics are concerned, from my experience here, I see this community evolving. We're evolving and we're evolving at a rapid pace. And what we're attempting to do is a significant investment in that evolution. So when we think of it like that, what outcomes do we want to reach for or obtain? What would be our objectives as far as outcomes are concerned as it relates to evolution? The metrics, I think that we have to put a system in place to measure those outcomes. Are we getting bang for the buck? Are we investing in places and ideas that will foster that evolution? Because if we don't, we'll sort of get left behind and we'll lose out on opportunities if we don't pay attention to how this evolution is impacting on the community. Sure, we have a significant need in terms of economic development with our small businesses and things like that. So that could be a part of our matrix, a part of our desire to foster those small businesses and to help them to progress and prosper. So if we look at this as an investment to the evolution of the community, I think we will be better off and we'll sort of like ride the wave of that evolution.
Thank you. I see Arby's hand is back up.
Yeah, I have a question in regards to Mr. Witherspoon saying that we are evolving rapidly. I would like to see the evidence and how and what metrics support that. I'm very curious as to how that evolution is measured. I agree. There's a lot of things that need to go into how we structure this moving forward. But right now, I don't think we have an accurate view of what the community has and has not.
Okay, I can give you an example from where I sit. In the last 2 years, this institution's assets have literally doubled in 2 years. We went from $5 million to $10 million. And most of that is from people saving. And I mean, things are doing very well in our institution. And I'm really, really surprised that, oh, wow, our savings deposits are really, really growing. And that's a strong indicator of the economic vitality of a neighborhood. What type of savings does the community have? How are they managing their money? That's what makes the difference. Now, just think, if we had businesses up and down Center Avenue where the business owners would have an account with us, for example, people would spend money with that business and the business would bring it here, so that dollar would just circulate right here in the community. It's there, Arby. It is definitely there. It's just how we manage it and how we foster it that's going to make the difference.
Okay, so then one of the outcomes would be to do what? Because the concern I have is that we have one deposit. We don't know when we're going to have another deposit, if that will ever happen. And there are various needs in the community that's significantly under-resourced and disadvantaged. So the question becomes, how do we satisfy being a catalyst for the evolution that you speak of, and at the same time have sustainability of the fund for people that will be in need moving forward? So is our priority going to be the residents, or is it going to be the Center Avenue corridor? When I grew up, we had Center Avenue, Huron Avenue, and Wiley Avenue. So is it good to focus and put all of our eggs in one basket? I'm asking these questions to spur thought and discussion, because there's a lot at stake and we must have sustainability. So how do we measure that, and are we asking ourselves, does this fund give grants, or do we give loans, and do we expect a return so that we can turn that money over in regards to velocity of money to the next person or group?
Let me jump in if you wouldn't mind to respond to some of that.
Well,
Councilman.
yeah, I was going to say, the questions you're asking, Arby, were the questions that we were trying to address today. But just in the order that I saw them, if you don't mind, I saw Dr. Kimberly Ellis's hand go up, and then I saw Marimba's hand go up.
Okay.
Dr.
Yep.
Ellis?
Sorry, Marimba can go before me. I'm trying to adjust my camera and things.
Okay.
Thank you. So a couple of things to just refresh and guide our conversation here. On page 23 of the CSIP, which can be downloaded at hilldistrict.org/CSIP for easy access, the fund is already envisioned to support very specific activities. So again, this is just to refresh everyone. Workforce development initiatives, job placement programs, MWBE business development initiatives, MWBE business counseling programs, children and youth education initiatives, mortgage assistance subsidies, rent assistance subsidies, development investments, and other wealth building initiatives. And so we know that those are the things that the fund is supposed to address and respond to. Those are the issues that are already outlined within the guidelines. You may recall that at the last meeting, we talked about some of the early stage work that was done within the community to meet around some of the ways that we could break that down and some of the other costs that we would likely incur. And I won't get into that in this meeting. I'll give everybody a chance to revisit their email so that they can see how that was broken down before. But some of the key issues were what should be grants and what should we expect to invest as a loan, a favorable loan, a patient loan of sorts, where we will expect investment returns on that investment. So I think that's the first thing I want to address. And then we also did do some preliminary analysis. This was the Hill CDC and Felicity on some prior meetings with residents where we asked a little bit about how we should spend the funds, what percentage of the funds should go towards what. So we talked a little bit about minimum versus maximum, right? And I won't go through all of that again because I think it'd be best if everybody on this call had a chance to review that email, and I'll make sure that you get resent that right now so that you have access to that. And please read it because I think it could really guide our conversation here. But finally, I want to say that according to the market studies and information that we have, what we know about the market opportunities here in the Hill District, because it is, frequently believed that we don't have a healthy market. What we know is that we have this is annual leakage. So listen to some of these numbers. This is annual leakage, meaning what leaves our primary trade area and or neighborhood. We lose 2.3 million in the furniture and home furnishing business area. We lose 1.2 million in electronics and appliances. We lose 3 million in clothing and clothing accessories. We lose about 150,000 in health and personal care. We lose 1.9 million in sporting goods, hobbies, books, and music. We lose $10 million in food and beverage. We lose $8.8 million in general merchandise. We lose $3.5 million in building materials and home improvements. We lose $4.6 million in food services and places to, go out and drink. And then, of course, quite the opposite in gasoline stations. We're not seeing a lot of leakage there, but the rest of those areas prove to provide a tremendous opportunity for us as a community to really focus our investments into areas where we know businesses will do well. So that would be one of the metrics that I would be looking for, is that we are targeting our investments in areas that we know the market is going to support those businesses. So let's use the data to drive some of our decisions. The other thing that I would be looking for is impact. And I think that we have to balance impact along a gradient, a scale of kind of individual impact versus communal impact. And I think that you see that almost in the categories that we're looking to focus on. So if we're doing, for example, a facade, I don't want to say a facade improvement. If we're doing like a home repair grant, right, to a family. That's an individual impact that will have an impact on the broader community, but it's much more targeted to a single family, a single resident. If we do an investment and close the gap on a project that's going to serve the entire community, that's a different kind of impact, a communal impact. And so I think that when I think about outcomes and metrics, I'd like for us to be really focused on how we use the bulk of the resources to have that broader communal impact while still honoring and lifting up those individual impacts. And the one thing I'd like for us to consider as a metric to determine that is, are we duplicating funds that are already available? So in other words, are we giving rent subsidy to people who would qualify to get funding from rent relief from some of the other ARPA funds that are available, right? Like, do we want to duplicate services? Are we giving money to people who could otherwise go to the Housing Opportunity Fund or to some of the other confirmed agencies who are supporting individuals? So I think that we should really use that as a metric and be prepared to support individual family members, community members, to go where the resources are, even if those resources are not directly available through us. Thank you.
Thank you. But before we go to Dr. Ellis, Marimba, I just want to make sure, because you laid out three uses, or that's not the appropriate word, but three ways to look at how we utilize our money. I just want to make sure we accurately captured it, because I don't think anyone's really going to disagree with you. I think the first you laid out was using where we're losing money to the marketplace as a metric of where we should be sending our dollars to support those businesses. What were the other two?
Right, that we're not duplicating
Yes.
our investments where funds are already available. Let's make sure that we have a resource kit for those areas where people can get support from other agencies, so that we're not duplicating resources. And the other item was really kind of measuring, I guess, individual impact versus communal impact, and thinking about how we assess that fairly, because of course we want residents to feel and be supported. We also want to make sure that we can see our neighborhood developed. And so I don't know that it's a matter of picking or choosing versus actually determining the percentage that we're going to give. And so when I was saying that we'll resend the breakdown, we had already done some thinking around how the fund could be broken down by percentage, like 15% could go to this, or it should be in your inbox, in fact, already. 15% could go to one thing, while 5% goes to another, while 25% goes to another, to create some balance for the fund. And we were also thinking about what should be a patient or slow loan versus what should or could be a grant. Those are the areas that I think we would be well served to explore more deeply. I know we can't do all of that today, but those are my thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Kim? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so there's several thoughts around this whole discussion. One is that we need to do an audit of what the Hill has, because I agree with Marimba that we don't need to duplicate funds and resources. We actually have some underutilized resources. So we want to make sure that we're taking full advantage of what's available, what's, happening, what we have. Case in point. So and then there's timing, right? And I think for this first set of funds, I guess we have to keep in mind that the LRTA, this is supposed to be what, like roughly, I'll say, I guess when the money comes down, I was going to say this is supposed to be a 10-year deal, but I guess when the money is available, it's really like a 5-year deal, right? So we have priorities in terms of timing. And so also and actually a quick question for you, Councilman Lavelle, is when is the housing stabilization funds, when are they supposed to be made available?
That was tied to the Live Nation development, so that wouldn't occur until at least that development began to move forward.
Okay, thank you. So that's a perfect example. So yeah, I think one, we've already said that home ownership and rent subsidies are important to us. And I think that F&B Bank, PNC Bank, all of these banks, right, are in a renewed understanding, I guess, of their commitment to community. And everybody has these statements. And we need to make sure that these banks are making good on their statements and providing mortgage assistance. And I think that we should be, I think this neighborhood reinvestment fund should be a supreme gap funder. Because oftentimes what happens is it doesn't matter if it's an individual trying to buy a home, if it is someone who it needs some rent subsidy, or someone who's trying to engage in a business, or a developer who is trying to develop a project. What I've seen is that there's a tremendous need for gap funding. And that way you have someone who has already pursued some other sources, be it they went to the bank, they went to, I'm forgetting the entity, but they went to an agency for rent subsidy. They've applied to Neighborhood Allies for their development or something like that. And then we can provide some type of a gap funding. And I think that for a developer, it should never be a grant. It should always be a loan. That's just my opinion. I know that's another question, so I'll pause on that. But yeah, overall, I think that an edit is necessary, that timing is necessary. And considering the fact that the Housing Stabilization Fund doesn't even come until the Live Nation project begins, then housing stabilization and fixing up houses like that's a major priority for present homeowners to have access to funds to fix up something in their homes. I think that's extremely important when it comes to just stabilizing the housing, literally. And then I think that let's see, there's housing, there's I think that when we do the audit, I think that children and education is often left out. And I think that, there's a whole issue of what we can be doing as a community. And honestly, we're just not doing enough. But I think when it comes to job placement, case in point, we don't need to recreate, for example, the First Source Center. We have the First Source Center. That's a classic job placement center where we're literally underutilized. And I think the organization that has helped us out the most has been the Grayson Center. So everybody needs to be, flooding Hill residents over to the First Source Center and other workforce development that we actually already have in the community. The Pitt CEC, what's the work that they're doing when it comes to our youth and our children? We need to promote those programs. Ebenezer Church and their CVS Tech and workforce program. So this is why I'm saying we need to do an audit, because I do agree. And I think that we've all, if you've driven around Pittsburgh, you understand that you could even be downtown Pittsburgh and that you could open up new great businesses in downtown, and those businesses have closed. I've seen a grocery store close. I've seen popular restaurants and places that were open one minute, they had great grand openings, and the next year or two, they were closed. And this is before COVID. So we need to keep all of this in mind. So I'm recommending 1, an audit. 2, I'm recommending that we actually don't duplicate services. 3, I'm recommending that we institute a gap funding assistance. And 3, that we prioritize housing stabilization now for current residents, and to also promote the Hill District for people to move in and get mortgage assistance and have these discussions with these banks, so that if they're not giving grants, then I do think that's an area where we actually should give grants. Is anybody trying to make a down payment on a home, who's a home buyer in the Hill District? I think that would be very important. So I'll stop there. I'm sure I have more, but I'm sure we're going to revisit this conversation as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And only thing that I would add is, I think, 1, it seems consensus. I've heard numerous people on this say that these should essentially be last dollars in and should not supplement dollars that are already available other places. So I think that's probably a consensus. The other thing I think that I would add, and for the URA staff, it may be important, and we can do it in the new year, for us to give another overview to the community of the Housing Opportunity Fund, because much of what Kim spoke to is actually available right now. We actually have down payer assistance available for people to purchase homes right now. We actually have dollars that can be used to fix up homes. So while it's obviously critical, many of those resources are already available, and our residents probably just aren't taking full advantage of it. With that being said, before I saw Arby's hand go up, but I want to just give others an opportunity to speak if anyone wants to jump in before I go back to Arby.
I'm sorry, one more thing, Councilman LaBelle. Sorry, Arby, real quick. I think that the gap funding should also be for people who are literally lie inside the gap of like some of these regulations, right? So case in point, the URA has a great program. Where if there's a development, somewhere near your block, you qualify for a grant, but that also has income limitations. I don't want to mention any names, especially because this is recorded, but if an elder person or older person is taking care of someone else and their income is seen as being above the limitations, but it's not an accurate reflection of like the cash that they have on hand. I think this is where we should come in and provide that gap funding. So I just wanted to clarify that as well. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you. Anyone else?
I have one more comment about last in. I just want to go on record to state that I think that we should seriously consider first in dollars for developments that have already done some diligence independent of, kind of 100% technical assistance provided by another agency, so to speak. So let me give you an example. If there's a development that is being led, for example, by an organization or a small nonprofit organization, or an organization that does not have the capital to pay for all of the pre-development, or a small business that doesn't have the capital to do all of the pre-development, but it is a clear and viable development with a bankable pro forma, should all of the funds fall together in the capital stack, I think that it would be very, very smart of us to be first in, even if it is a patient long-term loan or a partial grant patient long-term loan. Pre-development dollars are the hardest to come by, and they are largely what have, the absence of pre-development dollars is largely what has, in part, there are some other conditions, so I don't want to overstate, what has kept our community in arrested development. We as a community that is largely low wealth, there is not the credit or the capital to front $200,000 that's needed to bring a project online. And so people will just go somewhere where that deal is going to be more bankable and or where they can access capital more easily as a part of their deal. There's a lot of work that has to happen in our communities that are on the fringe of a market or still pre-market stage in order to get to the stage where you can get all of the capital that you need for your deal. So I just want to make sure that we are all not in the same pool relative to last in gap financing, because I think there's a real opportunity for pre-development.
Thank you. Don't disagree with you, actually. Arby?
Well, I want to reemphasize something I said in the first meeting, that our fund needs to be approached last, not first, that whoever or whatever the entity is, except for a resident in need for their own personal dwelling, even in those cases, because we only have one deposit. And Live Nation will probably go 2025 or so, maybe 2026. So that's 3 to 4 years from now. So that's one thing that needs to be a strong consideration. Residents need to be prioritized, because you can't have Black business without Black residents. and how we do those things with the housing opportunity fund, however that works, needs to be the priority. Right now, we have a community that doesn't have the essential services such as a pharmacy. We will have a grocery store. We don't have a bakery. We don't have a dry cleaner. Just the basic things that you need. We have to travel outside of the community. We need to, the outcomes that I want is I want wealth to be distributed amongst the many and not just a few. So we need to look at outcome that I want is that we have many people participating in the redevelopment of the Hill and not just a few. So I understand, you know, the concepts of being, excuse me, have an alert coming in. I understand some of the concepts are being put forth, but the existing residents and attracting new residents should be one of our primary outcomes. Because once we do that, then the other things will be supported. This is not the field of dreams where we build it and they will come. I don't believe that that's going to happen, or that's even a reasonable expectation. So the residents, I believe, existing residents and obtaining new residents should be one of our priorities for an outcome. Metrics, we have to develop the metrics. We don't have them, and we have a lot of supposition, and we need to have some concrete metric decisions upon. And I also believe we need to add more capital to the Hill District Credit Union, because they are better in tune on how to make these risk assessments than we are. We're novices, they are not. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to chime in? If not, most of your comments did speak to outcomes metrics as well as selection criteria. What we haven't had a deep dive on, although I'm asked Marimba to speak to it because I know the CDC has been looking into this, is if a grant is, well, two things. How much should be grant versus loan? And then if a grant is awarded, what is how much of that should be reimbursable, and or do we also want to cap how much a grant could actually be? But I know the CDC has been looking into that and done some work around it already. So I'm gonna ask Marimba if she would sort of help inform that conversation, that discussion.
Sure. Thank you, Councilman. So if you all refer to your emails, you'll see an email that's in your inbox from Felicity, I believe, with a breakdown of the areas that we're looking at. I'm happy to share my screen if I'm able to do that here. I'm not sure. Let me check.
You're a co-host. I think you can, Marimba.
Yes, I just stopped sharing my screen, and I did make you a co-host, Marimba, so you can share whenever you're ready.
Perfect. Okay. All righty. So this particular chart shows you the eligible uses as outlined in the CSIP, and also considering the historic Hill institutional preservation, which was the one that is not explicitly named in the CSIP, but that rose to the surface with the community engagement that happened relative to the LERTA guidelines that we did months ago, actually over a year ago now. So everything that has an A in front of it is notated as something that should be a grant. Everything that has a B in front of it to the left is expected return on investment. Okay, and then you have the subcategories by style of grant or investment, noted here with a Roman numeral. All right, so administration, workforce development, job placement, MWBE business counseling initiatives, children and youth education initiatives, mortgage assistance subsidies, rent assistance subsidies, project development, and historic Hill institutional preservation were all envisioned as grants. And you can see that the thinking was that a minimum of 5% of the fund would be used for administration and a maximum of 10% of the fund would be used for administration. Relative to the granting area, we're talking about 15% minimum and then 20% maximum for grants. So that gives you some very clear kind of guardrails, so to speak, of how much is granted and cannot be returned to the fund. And then you have the expected return on investment areas. So that's MBE, business development initiatives, development investments, other wealth building initiatives, and recurring revenue initiatives under community control. All right. So these areas here are envisioned at 10% minimum for MWBE business development initiatives, and then maximum 20%. And then development and investments, we have 40% with a maximum of 50%. And then other wealth building initiatives and recurring revenue initiatives under community control, we had at minimum 10%, at maximum 20%. So, obviously, we can take some time to really think through this or talk about this as a committee, even if not today, but this at least gives us a starting point. And it also gives us a great starting point because we've already engaged a very broad range of stakeholders on this conversation. Any questions on this?
Yes. Do you have supporting documentation for this that you can share with?
We have a process. We have a process documented, and we also involved people who have experience doing fund management.
Okay, so this is where I'm coming from. A investment fund has a regularly scheduled deposit, has a vehicle within the structure of the fund to grow the funds, and it has an output. We don't have all of that, and I'm trying to understand what time frame. I don't have supporting documentation that shows me that those are the optimized targets and what is a priority. So I need that. We need to have that to be able to make a sound judgment. We don't have any basis to, at this time, to put one area of priority above the other. And overall, the time frame is not specified. So what are we talking about, making these disbursements over 1 year, 2 year, 3 year? And keep in mind that we may never get another deposit for 4 years. So, and the census tract for 305 will be changed, and they'll be needing, because they won't be qualifying for community development block grant money. Census tract 506 doesn't. And the other 4 will soon follow as time moves on. So we need the supporting documentation, and we need to be able to see it so that we can discuss it in advance. Right now, I understand your approach, but I don't see the validity.
Understood, Arby. Thank you for that. I can tell you that time, obviously, the activity that we were going through was much more focused on guidelines and how to put some structures around, and as is always the case, we didn't have an unlimited amount of time to do an evaluation. I think that the evaluation provides a great starting point for the committee to do its work. So I think it is the committee's work to do that other work that you are looking to do, Arby. So I would love if you got involved with participating in the work that's necessary for the committee to be able to take its next steps after this foundational work. Alicia?
Thank you. In many ways, thanks for that, Arby, because I'm kind of piggybacking off of you on this one. But my concern with the numbers here, what was the determining factor, which is in essence what Arby was kind of saying in terms of finding the research for that. I see a potential for loss with so much being put towards the loan aspect of things when the community needs. And I'm concerned about there being a MWBE counseling initiatives up top. And then in the loan section, 10 to 20%. It seems like counseling and giving should go hand in hand. So that's why some of these categories are causing a little bit of pause for me. And I think that when it comes to the people and residents of the Hill District, those who are here, those who we are trying to attract and even bring back, this section here with 15 to 20% may need to be higher. Because if we're going to grant some of this funding, it will be for those projects. Everything is not always bricks and mortar. We must speak to the needs of our children, our seniors, the needs of the community. We're right now talking about bringing the grocery store. That's great. But we're also talking about reinvesting ourselves in this. And I think that we need to put a little more focus on the people. This feels very brick and mortar-ish to me. And I'm concerned about the loan factor, because if a failed loan is there and we are giving 40 to 50% of these funds, how will we recoup those monies? And what guarantee do we have that those monies will come back? What's our process for that? So in many ways, Arby, you did hit on it, thank you. But I have some concerns about the numbers.
And I think that's the work of the committee. I think we dive into that and adjust accordingly. I think that obviously the initial focus was to do development with the fund, but the CSIP expressly states that these other areas are critical areas. So that is the work of the committee. This work was based on the people who participated in the process and gave input. And the work of the committee will follow this and ultimately determine how we move forward. I'm going to call on Kimberly and then Felicity.
Okay, yeah, so I definitely agree with both Arby and Alicia in terms of what they've shared. And I guess I'm trying to understand can you explain again, I guess use development investments as the barometer here. What is the 40% and the 50%? I'm trying to understand this column.
So the 40% is the minimum, the 50% is the maximum. So a minimum of the LRTA funds received would go towards that. And then the maximum of the LRTA funds received would be the 50%.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I definitely need to read it. This is, so look, I appreciate whatever efforts that you all did initially, but this is skewed, and this is not appropriate, like by any stretch of the imagination. And this is why I said we need to do an audit, because to think that the LRTA funds should majority go to development investments at 40% is ridiculous on many different levels. It's the people, it is the residents that do not have what they need to have in order to even stay here. And that is a part of my point that I made last time, which is we saw downtown businesses that we know had some housing and that have a full office downtown Pittsburgh, right? And we still saw businesses open and close. To Arby's point, you can't sustain a business if you don't have enough people. I mean, that's just a very basic idea. And then again, these numbers, right? This LRTA funds, this first deposit is supposed to be, we're supposed to be doing things to make sure that gentrification does not take place in a rapid form. I mean, to a certain extent, we want the gentry because we have a very low income community, and we would love to have, more African-American neighbors that are, middle class, that are upper class. I mean, there's a certain part of this that we actually do need the gentry, but to the extent where you have these people calling our homes and trying to get our homes for cheap, right? We definitely need to fight off against that level of exploitative gentrification. And so it's important that we prioritize them and prioritize them first. And then again, like what Daniel said, the Housing Stabilization Fund won't even be available until Live Nation comes down. If that's 2025 and it's 2021, we will have failed. We need to do we need to put the housing stabilization and assistance for residents up top. And then lastly, just as a point, the fact that the historical institutional preservation was something that was added and made to be a priority, and to the point where it will receive a grant. And yet, this is something that I put in the minutes. So for those who don't know, the Historical Institute, is placed at a 1-year point of service. The priorities don't match up. So it's like you want the funding, but you don't actually want the representation on the Greater Hill District Reinvestment the Neighborhood Reinvestment Fund. It doesn't add up. And these are the types of things that we need to address, adequately before we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Just really
Thank
quickly,
you.
just one clarification, Councilman. I'm sorry.
No,
I want to clarify that the Historic Hill Institutional Preservation was specifically added because the pastors had very strong feelings about making sure that there were funds to preserve the churches. So that was the initial and focused intent there. So the way that it was framed was Historic Hill Institutional Preservation, keeping in mind that many of us are really concerned with preservation in general. But that is why we are here to do this work. I think the input is great and healthy. We should move accordingly. Felicity, and then we'll move back to Councilman.
Alrighty, thank you, Marimba. I just wanted to provide a little additional context here that I think is helpful. And we've heard this on the call today as well. We heard this in the engagements. There were several engagements over the end of 2019 and the beginning through, I believe, about April or so of 2020. One of the biggest concerns was, and we've heard this raised here again today, is longevity of the fund. And so there will not be longevity of the fund if the majority of the investments are grants, because once that money has gone out, it does not come back. And so people understand, that was the thinking. Because we heard that feedback, the response to that from a fund management perspective is therefore to limit the amount of percentage of the fund that would go towards granting then. If the big concern is longevity, as I said, majority of the funds cannot go towards grants. That being said, when you start to look at, well, what can be grants versus investments, it would not make sense to make a loan to children and youth education initiatives. Those would have to be grants. It would not make sense to do rent assistance subsidy as a loan. That would not be helpful to someone. Those need to be grants. So I'm not saying that this is right or wrong. I'm just explaining the thinking. If the concern is longevity, once grant money goes out, it is gone. And so the idea was wanting to make sure that those grant items were prioritized and that you were not doing loans to eligible uses that did not make sense, but that in order to have the longevity, you would need to have, and you'll see it's not the majority here, it's less than the majority. You would have to have in loan or revenue expected return investments. That's why it's categorized as expected return. That way we could grow the fund through those investments. You would take you talked about like what happens if the loan falls through. Well, you would, as in any type of loan, you would take a position where you would recoup, whatever assets are being pledged as part of the loan. You would have to take a position where that's first or secondary in a loan, but this is really just financial management. So there would be an opportunity to recoup potential losses if someone were to default on a loan. But that is obviously something that would have to be considered by the committee as well. So I just want to kind of explain a little bit more of the thinking there. Again, neither is right or wrong, but the understanding of the tensions between wanting to ensure that there are grants to these investments, but that is inconsistent with the longevity desire for the fund, because once grants go out, they can't come back.
Thank you, Felicity. Councilman?
You made the clarification that I was looking to make. We can go to RB.
Thank you.
So from all that I've heard, it seems like one of the outcomes that we want is for the existing residents and new residents. And I think moving forward that we know that the speed of gentrification is the economic development. And we need to slow that and the dislocation. So how we do that is where I think we should be putting efforts. And this guideline or table, we need, if there's no supporting documentation behind it, then that's how we need to accept it as, someone's opinion. I think that the consensus is that, at least from a few of the board members, is that the residents need to be prioritized and not brick and mortar. I believe brick and mortar is going to be essential because right now the hill has a 0 for velocity of money, or velocity of money is 0. So the outcome and the metrics and the priority, I believe we should try to establish. I don't think that we have the capability, other than Mr. Witherspoon, to assess risk in regards to a loan. And perhaps if we are going to consider loans, then that institution should be, that institution should be prominent in that decision making.
Yeah, and we had talked about hiring a fund manager. Just to be clear, there were at least 30 community stakeholders, most of whom were residents who participated in the allocation process. Many are experienced developers and fund manager. One fund manager participated in other financial professionals as well. So I just want to make sure that we're clear. It does not mean it should be our priorities, but I do think that accurate understanding of how we landed here as a baseline is important. So in the interest of time, I'm gonna hand this back to Councilman Lavelle. I think that this is enough for the committee to move forward and to take the best and leave the rest.
Well,
So,
I don't have next steps. So what are our next steps in funding?
So my recommendation as a next step is that Marimba said that what she just presented is in everyone's inbox. My recommendation as a next step would be for each one of us to actually go through those categories and put our percentages of what we believe they should be, whether it's 10%, 20%, whatever that may be. And then we also write in whether we believe it should be worth a grant or a loan. We ask URA staff to compile that information. And then when we meet again, we can have at least a sense of what the general consensus is, or what the range of consensus is based upon those categories.
So, if I may, it seems as though it's a systematic wild guess with these percentages. I think we need to develop some supporting evidence to support them. Right now, we don't have anything other than a belief, and I don't think that's good enough for the community. We get one shot at this.
What are you calling? What do you? I'm sorry, I apologize to cut you off, but what are you calling supporting documentation, Arby?
Well, for each category, there are metrics that are available and can be developed. That needs to be done first before you can say, well, I don't think it's 40%. I think it should be 15%. And my question is based upon what? What do you have that supports that moving forward that's sustainable in year 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5? What measurable and how exists or will be developed that says that is the appropriate percentage? In my opinion, it doesn't exist until we develop it. And asking people to come up with a random percentage, I don't think that is the best approach for the community. It would be different if we had multiple deposits coming into this fund, and we don't. We don't know when the next one will be, and if there will be a next one. Because if I remember correctly, there was some question whether Block E, Live Nation, would go forward as a project. So I think we need to do our due diligence and let the metrics support our approach and be able to defend that moving forward. Right now, our approach is not defensible.
I think that we simply have to, go ahead, Councilman, I'm sorry.
Well, okay, thank you. I hear you, Arby, but I don't think there's any one right answer to that. I think all of us are going to bring a slightly different perspective. So as an example, Dr. Ellis spoke at length about the need to support housing. My response was, I hear you, and I understand there's a priority, but I also know that there are these other resources that maybe can do some of what you're asking to be done. So I don't necessarily believe the percentage should probably be as high as what she does. Difference of opinion based upon different facts that we're both bringing to the table, right? Different sets of information. And so I don't think there's any one right answer. I think part of what the CDC, when Marimba first began speaking, was she said, we're losing money here, 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 and here to all these other businesses. And so when she factors it in, based upon that set of information, that's going to help inform her. I think what each of us have to be able to do, and Mr. Witherspoon also spoke about the money that he sees coming in. So he has a very unique and distinct perspective. I don't think any singular one is right or wrong, but I think we all have to bring that information, share it, put it in, and then tally it all up and see where we end up. That's my opinion. I also think that this entity, at the end of the day, has to decide what our priority is, because that's then going to help guide your actual percentages. So making this up, if I say I want to give 75% of it as investment dollars for business development, that's my priority. And then those percentages are going to reflect that. This committee has to be able to do that. What I'm suggesting is until we, each one of us, fill out, go through, put our percentages down, and provide what you're asking for, the rationale behind it, we won't come up with what a unified decision is even, or we won't even be close to it. And so my mind is always trying to move us to get something done. And so get to the next step. Now I know that's not always right, but I'm just giving you my thinking. Marimba, I think you were trying to chime in when I started talking.
I think you covered it. Bottom line is, I think ultimately the priorities will define the percentages. You know, this is going to be as much a philosophical and discussion, but also a discussion around, again, our values. What are our shared values? Where do we want to have impact? We're just going to have that conversation, and then we can determine how we allocate percentages. Otherwise, I mean, you know, you could give all of it in grants, as you said, but you probably won't be in business very long, and that's fine if that's what we decide is our value. You know, we could give none to development, but then we know that development is the most expensive thing on this list. And so a $10,000 grant or $50,000 grant for development is not really going to move a development forward, right? And so then we have to know that we're not going to see as much development. So it's really just about priorities, and we just have to have that conversation to determine that. Thank you.
I think that if we look at this from the angle of an investment in the community as opposed to a grant to people, I think we would have a different perspective, because when you invest, you expect a return on that investment. So if we're going to grant people funding, what type of return are we expecting from that grant? And I would say, to broad brush, it would be community development. So when we go to either loan or grant or anything like that, I think there's a lot of focus that should be placed on what is the return, what's going to happen if folks are able to get a grant or get a loan from this fund. We're looking, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in the short term. You know, if there's a business that needs that support, and it's going to take them a while to get off the ground, a year or 2 or 3 or whatever the case may be, for them to become viable, you know, that support is needed. But it would be on us to do our due diligence to make sure that that investment, that grant, that loan is going to have a significant return from us, making that transaction. You know, so that's just something to consider. You know, what is the return on this grant or investment or loan?
Are you talking about financial return, or are you talking about qualitative return? I think
qualitative, community development return.
Okay,
You
so
know,
qualitative return.
Are we investing in someone's legacy? You know, I'm not just thinking about financial return. Oh, no, that's easy. It's the community development return that is should be prevalent.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to chime in on these questions? It is 4:10. We were slated for a 2-hour meeting. If not, again, what I would ask is that everyone please take time, at least a week prior to our next meeting, have filled out this form, put in your priorities, your percentages, based upon supporting documentation. If you may have it, you may not, but if you have supporting documentation, please provide that rationale as well. And then I'm gonna ask URA staff to sort of try to put together a synthesis of what the thinking is, so that we at least have sort of a borderline understanding of where we as a body collectively think. If we're done with that, I believe that moves us to new business, other business. Is there any other business that a member would like to bring forward at this time?
Yes, I have a couple concerns. The one question I have is this board subservient to another board or entity?
No.
That answer was a no?
Councilman, I can chime in too.
Okay.
RB, this board, I would not use the word subservient, but I would say that this board makes recommendations on which applications and projects to fund to the URA board, who has the ultimate discretion.
Well, that's not really in agreement with the settlement agreement and the CSIP. The CSIP says that the URA is the custodian. Okay.
That is what the guidelines say.
Well, that's where our problem is that the guidelines, and they were not developed by this body. So I would say that we are a subservient to the URA, and the community will probably consider us to be a proxy of the URA. So that, in my mind, is a problem that needs to be addressed, because we need to be independent. The placement of the on the URA's website just further reinforced my belief that we need to have our own website and our own staff. The CSIP says administrative, so it's well within the CSIP item alpha, the first item, to have administrative staff to support this board. I think that that's something that we need to do. I'm trying to understand how the URA is the arbitrator of our questions, and we can't arbitrate and decide amongst ourselves. So there's several questions that I have that need to be addressed. And the things, when they're addressed, I need to see the supporting documentation, because there's a lot of opinions that are being promoted as fact that needs to be curtailed. So that's the one question that I have regarding that. The other question I have is, I don't believe that the election that was held in the last meeting was just. It was not conducted in accordance with Robert's Rules of Order, nor the CSIP. And I think that needs to be explored moving forward. It was not properly conducted in accordance with the CSIP, who voted, who did not vote, and Robert's Rules of Order was not utilized, and the winning entity did not have a majority. So that needs to be addressed moving forward, because we need to be transparent in how we conduct our business. the last thing is I'm trying to understand what happened earlier, because we're talking about public money and we're operating as a private board with rights and isn't required to follow Robert Rules of Order. So I need to have a clear understanding in writing whether or not this board is a public board or not. I don't believe we're following the Pennsylvania Sunshine Law and how things are supposed to be conducted. And that law was amended, I believe, mid-year of 2021, June or July. So there's some outstanding things that need to be done. The guidelines as written, I'm having difficulty with the selection of who votes and who doesn't vote. That's not in accordance with the CSIP. And I'm having difficulty as to how people determine who should be 2 years or 3 years when you have the consensus group in business for 30 years and another group has been in business for 10, 20 years. And then we have a lot of gaps that need to be addressed. And I believe that needs to be done in a fast manner for clarity so that people can understand what this board stands for and what is its business moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe David Geiger wanted to address at least one of your questions, and then I saw Alicia's hand go up as well.
Yeah, Arby, I can answer, I think, or at least partially answer the first and third question that you posed. The first, just to clarify on Hannah's statements, it is in the guidelines, and while you're correct, the guidelines do not reflect the CSIP when it comes to the URA being the governing board of this fund. That is reflected in the LERTA co-op with the 3 taxing bodies, which are, diverting and providing these funds. So that's where the URA's governing board is sort of placed into a governing document. And then,
if I may, can you supply that documentation to the board?
Yeah, we'll look into that and get back to you on it. And in addition to that, the other thing that we'll look into and get back to you on is when, drafting these guidelines, URA legal did review them. And I don't believe at that time it was the opinion of our legal department that this board was subject to the Sunshine Law. You are correct, it was updated earlier this year, and we will go back and review that and determine whether or not we still believe that this board can hold these closed door meetings as opposed to public meetings.
So help me understand how the URA staff, such as yourself, is the final arbitrator. How was that established?
As I mentioned, that's in the LERTA co-op between the taxing bodies, and then the actual specifics and mechanics of how the advisory board interacts with the governing board is laid out in guidelines adopted by the URA board, which I believe you are in possession of.
So wait a minute. So
sure.
That's not an answer to my question, if I may. So what you're telling me is that the URA took it upon itself to write how this board would conduct its business and who would be on the board and for how long. It was arbitrary. There's no preceding document that establishes any of that. Correct?
I don't think that that's a correct statement, though. I'm not sure I fully understand what you're saying.
I clearly stated is that how we conduct our business, who's on the board, and their length of term, and what positions people occupy was determined by the URA, and there's no preceding document that gave them the authority to do that. So I'm trying to understand how this is all going on, because I'm getting questions about
Sure.
this.
Yeah,
Okay,
so I think there are multiple preceding documents to the guidelines that were adopted by the URA board, and each one of those documents helped inform the guidelines that were ultimately adopted by the URA board, and the URA board was empowered and expected by the LERTA co-op document with the taxing bodies to adopt guidelines that would help govern the fund and would serve as the governing board of the fund. And that is laid out in the LERTA co-op. And I think that when we're able to provide that documentation to you and you are able to review it, that this explanation will be a bit more clear. I simply don't have the document in front of me, and it's been a little while since I've reviewed it, so I can't cite the specific passages that I think would provide you with a satisfactory explanation.
So you're telling me that the taxing bodies told you who should be on the board and what their terms should be?
No, not entirely. I'm saying that part of what went into the guidelines is found in the LERTA co-op. Part of it is found in the CSIP.
So what I'm saying is it appears to me that we're following the CSIP when it's convenient. And when it's not convenient, we defer to other means. So that was something that needs to be clarified, in the supporting documentation and how that all pieces together needs to be provided. I hope that it's provided within the next 7 days, 5 business days before Christmas, because there's a substantial amount of questions regarding that moving forward, we're a proxy for the URA. So thank you for your time.
Harvey, I hear what you're saying, and we will work with the URA legal team, and then the staff will work with the co-chairs of this committee to distribute those foundational documents to you all.
Thank you, David. Appreciate that. I do have a clarifying question on that as you take some questions back. I believe that there was some language intended to, or there was some discussion around the guidelines specifically stating that disbursements would happen only upon the recommendation of the advisory board, but I do not know, I cannot recall offhand if those were, if that language was confirmed. If it was, I think that that's, prudent to this conversation, or pertinent to this conversation, excuse me. And I think that we should take a look at that. I want to move on to Alicia. She has had her hand raised for a while.
Thank you. In many ways, I would like to see the advisory committee, this committee, handle the community's needs, the community's opinions, and advise. So therefore, some of these things that we are talking about today, even going as far as talking about allocations, whether things are grants or loans, I would like to see a committee through which we can give our opinions to. I'm not as comfortable giving my opinions to a third entity to represent and give our opinions, because I may be basing my opinions on what my community, the people around me, are saying, and who I represent as a member of this advisory committee. And I feel that for the sake of the community and us moving forward, and especially, at the start of this meeting, they should have a place where they have a voice to deal definitely with each and every one of us, instead of going through an entity. So as we even talk about allocations, I would suggest that we really move forward with forming a committee where then this committee looks at our individual responses. And that way we're truly transparent to the committee, because the way we're talking about doing this, I will not know what someone else has presented until the URA tells us what has been presented. I will not see any of those facts or what we deem as an advisory committee as priority. So I would like to see a committee be formed so that we can fully advise on the behalf of the residents, our organizations, and our businesses.
Thank you, Alicia. We did talk about that at the last, not the last meeting, but the meeting before last. And there was conversation around whether or not we wanted to break out into committees. There were a number of people, and I'm pretty sure that most did not want to break out into committees because they wanted everything to be involve all committee members. And even though there was concern expressed about that not being the most efficient model, I know that there were many committee members who felt very strongly about that. So I tend to agree that a committee structure is going to be really important for us to keep progress and to be able to show some results. But there were some vehement parties on the committee who wanted to have the committee involved with every discussion. So I think we need to address that. We can perhaps address that via email over the next week. I think that will be important. So thank you for putting that back on the table. Elaine and then Kim.
Thank you. This is Elaine Ivasovic-Lozada from Allegheny County. I wanted to add that whoever is sharing the documents, the cooperation agreement, possibly the LRTA resolutions, the CSIP agreements, to also consider adding the LRTA state statute, because I was able to open the cooperation agreement, which is a 70-page document. So as people are reviewing it, there will be items in there that might seem to suggest outsized roles of any one organization or group or authority. And it might be helpful to refer back to the state statute, the enabling legislation, to see what roles are required legally. Because I know, in working on LRTAs here at the county, every time there's a question, we're like, well, what does the statute say? Let's refer back to the statute and then build from there. So that just might be an additional document to add to everybody's files.
Thank you, Elaine. Very helpful. Kimberly?
Yeah, so I wanted some clarity. It's partly to Arby's questions, but also for my own. This wasn't clarified for me. So I want to know what is the percentage and the actual financial amount that is being given to the Hill CDC out of the LRTA. I do understand the history. I do understand the Hill CDC filed the lawsuit to get the LRTA. So I definitely know about that. I'm just trying to find out, what are the actual finances and what are they for? And then the second question is there a percentage of each download, I guess, of the LRTA funds that continues to go to the Hill CDC? And that's what I would like to have clarity about that now.
Great question, Kim. Thank you for that acknowledgement of the role the Hill CDC played to secure the LRTA for the community. 4% is the number. So 4% of the total LRTA funds. So out of the 7.13, so to speak, that the Buccini Polling Group contributed to the LRTA fund, it would be 4%. It would be 4% of the funds that come to the LRTA fund, which is largely based on the projected amount, enough to not even fully support operations, but some operations, maybe some programs.
So if I may.
Yeah, so what's the cap? All right, because I'm not great with percentages. What is the cash amount and what is it for? Because it also pertains.
It's for general operations. It's for general operations, and it's 4% of whatever amount has been contributed.
So
to the LRTA. So Hannah or Julia, do you have the exact amount that was contributed to the LRTA?
I do somewhere, not
I
off
think
the
it was-
top of my head.
I think it was 7.13 something.
That does sound correct to me as well.
Okay, so it would be
It was-
times point
So it was
0.04.
7.8, but, okay, and
It's
then,
about 284,000.
Right,
Okay.
it's right.
all right, so, so
Can you
it, so-
repeat that? Can you repeat that for the record because you were muffled there, RB?
It's approximately 84,000.
You're going in and out.
yeah, we still,
Approximately 250,000.
no, that's not,
No, approximately 284,000. 284,000 is 4% of the 7.1 million that was deposited.
Correct. Whatever is deposited is 4%,
So
which would be whatever that number is times 0 times 0.04.
okay, so or Kim, did you, Dr. Ellis, did you get all your answers?
yeah, I mean, well, I wanted to know also what is the, is it a drawdown for each monetary deposit of the LRTA for each, like, you know, be it Live Nation, does it go on?
Yeah, it's for whatever LRTA funds come in. And the exact amount was put into chat. So for the $7,187,045 that was just deposited, 4% of that is $287,000, $287,481.80.
Okay, because I thought that it was stated that this was for administrative purposes for the LRTA, which is why the Hill CDC was receiving the funding, and now you're saying it's general operations.
No, it's never been for administrative funding. It was for general operations for Hill CDC for securing the LRTA for the community.
Okay.
In 2014 and 2015, didn't the Hill CDC receive $200,000 in 2014 and 2015? Receive another $200,000?
No, not at all. The Hill CDC will only get funding based on the payment of the LRTA.
No,
And only 4%.
I'm asking another question. Okay, so the growth fund gave the Hill CDC $200,000 in 2014 and gave the Hill CDC another $200,000 in 2015. And over 5 years, the Hill CDC received $1 million. So the question that are being asked of me is, didn't you get compensated for filing the lawsuit in 2014? It was settled in January 2015. It was filed in the fourth quarter of 2014. So these questions the community have, and they need to be addressed.
Right. So let me address that, or RB. So I think that part of the challenge is what people's understanding is based on when they came into the process, right? So let me clarify a couple of things. The Hill CDC, because of its prior advocacy, helped to secure funding for the initial growth fund. The initial growth fund that was held at the Poise Foundation. That's a whole separate fund. Okay. That fund, which was $3 million, and well, it was $3 million, and there are still funds there, right? The Hill CDC got a portion of that funding because of the role and work that it played in that effort, that specific effort. And remember that $3 million that was contributed, the original donor patron who gave to that really wanted to give all of that funding to the Hill CDC because they wanted to do development in the Lower Hill District that unfortunately ultimately was not given to them. And I do want to move on in the interest of time, but I want to, for transparency's sake, it seems like there's a lot of confusion. But no, hold on, RB. Let me answer the question, please. So the Hill CDC received $200,000 over 5 years from that fund instead of receiving all of it. The balance of that went to things like the grocery store, went to lots of small businesses, went to some of the nonprofits. You can find all of that on the Poise Foundation's website. That is not to be mistaken. That is not to be mistaken for this fund, which is the result of the Hill CDC settlement agreement that was filed in 2015 that established the agreement with the city to establish Alerta.
So
Okay.
here's the problem that people are having. You're saying that you're advocating for the Hill and you're a nonprofit and you're getting millions of dollars, and people are asking me questions like, well, what did they do with it and why did they get the money, and so forth and so on. So it doesn't, the optics don't look good. 5 years at $200,000 and then another $287,000 where the other nonprofits and the churches in the Hill are not able to receive funding like that. So there's a lot of concern in the neighborhood, and the answers that have been provided are basically insufficient.
Okay,
So,
well, duly noted. I
hold
just, Councilman,
hold
if I
on.
can just say, and I know we don't want to go back and forth here, but it is very important for people to appreciate and understand that a nonprofit organization is not a business plan. It is a IRS designation. We have staff, we have operating expenses, and at the end of the day, none of that money accrues to anything except for the mission of the organization, which is what we directed towards. It takes hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars to run organizations and businesses. And I think that we should be thinking differently, not just how we fund, not just the Hill CDC, but all of our organizations. So I'm happy to have that discussion. You can send anybody our way. We're at 2015 Center Avenue on the second floor. Our website is hilldistrict.org. We're available by phone. We're available by chat. We're available at our coffee and donut series. I'm happy to answer those questions. We also present and share our information on our website if someone wants to understand the extreme amount of work that the Hill CDC does on behalf of the community besides securing things like the Alerta. We can share all of that, but in the interest of time, I really do want to, I would like to move on, but I'm happy to answer these questions additionally in a public or in a recorded session, but not right now because it is already 4:36. Thank you.
It's 4:36. We are losing members, including myself in a second, as I've already started my 4:30 meeting. With that, we do have our homework. We will provide as quickly as possible an overview of this. This will be posted. At this point, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Can I have a second? That was done by Arby.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 We are adjourned. Thank you all for your considerable work.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Happy holidays.
Yes, happy holidays.
Have a good holiday.
And thanks. Happy holidays.